Hi there, welcome back to Super Sunday Matchday ahead of the final day of the Premier League season. Everton welcome Bournemouth to Goodison Park, knowing that a win will guarantee their safety. For more on that and more on other stuff, we're going to be joined by the Athletic's David Ornstein now. Good morning to you, David. You well?
Very well, thanks, Vicky. How are you guys?
We're really well.
Hi, Dave.
Speaking on their behalf, of course. Look, you are going to be at Goodison Park this afternoon. No doubt it's going to be nervy. They've lost on the final day 5 of the last seasons, which is a little bit of a worry. Are you expecting them to survive, though?
Yeah, I think I do, Vicky. I think with Sean Dyche at the helm and that crowd behind them today, we saw how they got Everton over the line under Frank Lampard last season. But one of those defeats you mentioned was in 2020 against Bournemouth. Bournemouth actually won at Goodison, but then went down on the final day. So from what I hear around the Bournemouth camp, that day has not been forgotten. There may be a bit of revenge on the cards. I also hear that they didn't stay on Merseyside last night, that they stayed in Manchester at a secret location that nobody knows about to avoid any disruption. So any idea that Bournemouth may be on the beach already, and that has been suggested a little bit, I think can be scratched off. I think they're bang up for this. They've lost their last few games and they want to finish what's been a good season for them under Gary O'Neill on a high. So it won't be easy for Everton, but I do think they'll have enough, even if Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't available. And if they don't get that win, then you can bet your bottom dollar that Leicester will be throwing everything at West Ham and Leeds also at Spurs. So it's an enormous day for one of the Premier League's founding members, a team that I think has been in the top flight since 1951. It's monumental, and I think either way it's going to be a day of high emotion, very contrasting depending on the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you mentioned, it's 69 years that they've been there. In fact, only Arsenal are on a longer unbroken stay in the top division. So how sort of perilous a position would the club be in if they were to go down, do you feel?
Oh, it's massive, Vicky, for their finances, which are already in a bad state. I think it's in excess of £400 million lost in the last 4 years. Farhad Moshiri, the owner, has ploughed in, £600 million of his own money into Everton. They are in a bad position financially. The Premier League is investigating them, of course. Their Premier League rivals wanted an outcome to that case before the end of the season. That clearly hasn't happened. So this could drag on over the summer through the courts. Of course, there's a stadium being built at Bramley Moor Dock. 2024, Everton are due to be moving in there, and dropping down to the Championship would have a massive impact on their revenues. They would see them drop drastically. Steve Parish wrote a really good piece in the Times, I think it was yesterday, about the financial impact it would have on his club, Crystal Palace. It's equally so Everton and the others. But when you're building a new stadium and the finances that requires, even with the parachute payments, it's no surprise of reports that Everton have now agreed a deal, or Moshiri has, with MSP Capital for investment into the club because they need money. It's been a tough period. Our audiences will remember that Alisher Usmanov's sanctioning meant that Everton lost some of their sponsorship, and there's a lot of questions about his prior involvement in Everton, full stop. And so, yeah, it's been a terrible few years for Everton in that sense. Changes of managers, players coming and going, questions about their recruitment. There's been a lot of change behind the scenes. I'm sure more will follow. I think there'll be changes at boardroom level too. The board haven't been in attendance at Goodison Park since, I think, January. So we could see some new faces there as well. It's a massive and really critical period in Everton's history.
Yeah, we were talking about players moving on, David. On Wednesday, you broke the story about Manchester United being the preferred destination of Mason Mount if he leaves Chelsea. How likely do you feel this is to happen? And who else could be in the frame, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's right, Darren. My understanding is that Mason Mount is leaning towards joining Manchester United if Chelsea agree to sell him, and that talks are expected between the clubs in due course. Of course, they met at Old Trafford on Thursday night, so there may have been some dialogue between the hierarchies of both clubs on that occasion. We'll see if that materialises into offers and deep negotiations. Chelsea, of course, have had a problem over his contract, which expires next summer. They failed to reach an agreement for whatever reason. He's one of the lowest paid players at Stamford Bridge. They decided to park those talks until the end of the season. So the conversations will be picked up, no doubt, but a lot of water has gone under that bridge, excuse the pun, and so there'll be questions about whether Chelsea are going to manage to get this back on track. They won't let him go into the last year of his contract, so it's going to be sign a new deal or sell him, which is pretty stark for an academy player who is Chelsea through and through by all accounts. And I think his ideal scenario would have been to spend longer there, but it seems increasingly likely that he could be leaving. Liverpool were the early front runners, but of course they're not going to be in the Champions League next season. Manchester United have always been there with strong interest. Arsenal too would like to bring him to their club, but it's Manchester United who have really stepped forward as far as I know. Nothing is done or finalised at this stage, but I think that's the direction of travel. And those other clubs, including Liverpool, Arsenal, Thomas Tuchel on behalf of Bayern Munich, who has a credible interest as well, have been made aware that Manchester United is Mount's preference. So it now remains to be seen if they can strike a deal club to club. That's a stumbling block. Manchester United's ownership situation remains unclear. They also have other positions as priorities too, such as centre forward. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens in these weeks ahead. But I think there's a high probability now that Mason Mount will leave Chelsea.
David, you mentioned how Chelsea have sort of let this one drift, and I find their position fascinating. I mean, this is a point where the ownership's relationship with the fans seems to fracture. The honeymoon's over for Todd Boehly and Bedad Eghbali. Do you think they can actually afford to let an academy graduate, fan favourite go, given the politics of the club at the moment?
Well, it's going to be a highly scrutinised decision either way. One thing they can afford is financially. It would be a sort of quite significant moment for them because he represents zero on the balance sheet, like all homegrown academy talents and products. And so a sale would bring them huge profit. They want £70 million for him. Let's see where it ends up if he's sold. The feeling around Manchester United is that a compromise may be reached at 55, I think, was reported by Sammy Mokbel in the Daily Mail. I think the desire of the clubs that are interested in him is more like 40, 45. So perhaps 50, 55 is something of a middle ground where it may end up. And that will really help Chelsea, who have financial fair play challenges with June 30th, the cutoff. That's hurtling into sight. So we're going to see a lot of departures from Chelsea. And clearly, with the academy products, Johnny being able to raise most revenue for Chelsea, and we might look at the likes of Conor Gallagher, Trevor Chalobah, Ruben Loftus-Cheek and others, there may be a lack of sentiment there and more a business approach taken to this for the Chelsea ownership, which will put them on a tricky ground with the fan base. But I think the results will dictate how they're viewed. They're a year into their ownership now. That anniversary has just passed. It's obviously been pretty controversial, tumultuous too, with changes of managers. If Mauricio Pochettino had started this season, they would have had 5 different faces in the dugout, which is extraordinary even by Chelsea's historic standards. And so this is a key appointment of Pochettino. And I think that and how they do in the transfer market and how they start next season will be the true bearing, as opposed to whether academy graduates stay or go. It will be tough for many fans to stomach. But if they manage to get, Pochettino in and things moving in the right direction again, some really good players added, some players that are perhaps surplus to requirements out, slim that squad down with no European football and really start getting this project on track, then I think their popularity will grow. That they are hardworking, the ownership, they are rolling their sleeves up and trying to get things done. You can argue about whether they've done it well and whether it should have been them doing it. They've now got sporting directors in place. There's been so much change behind the scenes after their takeover. And if they don't get this right, then of course the eyes are going to turn on them in a stronger way than we've seen in this past year. But I do think they've still got a bit of credit in the bank, however thin that is in the eyes of many.
Let's just stick with the theme of transfer then, because we know that Harry Kane is Manchester United's #1 transfer target. If it happens, would it be better for everyone if the deal is done early, or do you expect him to stay?
I think your first point, Vicky, is an idealistic view for many involved, but I don't think it's realistic because Daniel Levy, Tottenham's chairman, does not want to sell Harry Kane. We've seen that historically, and we've been given no reason to believe it's changed. Their priority is to try and sign him to a new contract. Some initial dialogue had taken place when Fabio Paratici was still there as technical director. I think managing director of football is his title. Him leaving means that those talks, to my knowledge, have not continued or picked up or gathered pace in any way, shape or form. They want to get this season out of the way. They need to appoint a new head coach and a replacement for Paratici. And then Harry Kane is obviously representing Tottenham's biggest asset, their best player, their top goal scorer, their talismanic leader, even though he doesn't have the armband. And so Daniel Levy knows that it's near impossible to replace him. Even if you get £100 million for him, you're going to spend, 80 plus of that on a replacement who might not guarantee you what Harry Kane does. So all the noises I was getting on Kane in recent months was it's going to take a much, much higher fee for Tottenham to even consider letting him go. They'll carry on these contract talks into next season, even if it takes that, even maybe if it means him leaving as a free agent and kicking this can down the road and addressing it in 2024. You've also got Kane's position in this, Vicky. We don't sense agitation like we did when he came very close to joining Manchester City. That was clear. We all ran stories about it that were well-sourced, that he wanted to leave. And we're not hearing that now, which makes me think he's in a bit of a quandary. What opportunities do I have elsewhere? Will Tottenham let me go? Could the new manager bring the chance of silverware, which is what he's always dreamed of, competitive football at Tottenham? Let's see on that front. Do I leave in 2024 as a free agent and finally take control of my own career at a time where, yeah, I'm getting older, but I'm still scoring hatfuls of goals and creating them as well? Perhaps I'll then have my pick of clubs. I look around and see, Manchester United heavily linked. Eric Ten Hag is pretty clear would like to sign Harry Kane, but do Manchester United as a club? Because, of course, age-wise and value for money and their ownership situation, there's no resale value on him. It's a massive financial decision that I'm not sure they're convinced about taking, especially when there's other options. Osman's very expensive, but Kolo Muani at Frankfurt, and then you've got Haaland at Atalanta, been heavily linked with him as well. So there are options there. I always think, what about Real Madrid? And that's been mentioned a bit in recent days with Karim Benzema a bit less productive. However, they are said to have their eyes on Kylian Mbappe, if not this summer, then next summer. So there are so many moving parts in this, and it all brings me to the conclusion that it's not going to happen quickly. And I think it's more likely that Harry Kane stays this summer than he departs. OK,
brilliant stuff as always from you, David. Thank you very much. I want to stay with that theme, though, of Harry Kane. What do you think? Because Jamie Redknapp called on him to leave this summer. He's kind of said it's time. What do you think? Yeah,
it's fun. It's striking how many ex-players are yelling at Harry to leave, and I think that's this recognition within the game that this is a guy that deserves to win something. But I think David touched on it there, that the thing that never really gets spoken about is Daniel Levy's position and Tottenham's position. And whatever Harry wants to do, the reality is that he's still got a year left in his contract. And I do think that what will define it will be what Spurs want to do with that. If Daniel Levy wants to dig in and keep him, I think he'll keep him. He's done it before. Partly because Harry Kane's not the kind of guy that's going to, there was agitation 2 years ago, but he wasn't refusing to train. It wasn't a soap opera. And he won't do that. He's not that type. I think David's probably right that if Daniel Levy's going to try and keep him, we could be looking at next summer and not this one. But the likes of United have to make a decision early, because what nobody wants is a Daniel Levy summer where you're sort of hanging on until August to find out what you're going to do. Nobody wants that.
Is that trademarked?
Daniel Levy summer. Yeah, and I guess the statue, the foundations haven't even been set yet either, so that maybe they need to put that in place. Let's go back to Manchester United then, Darren, because we were talking about Mason Mount. Do you think he would fit in there? Can you see that as a good fit? Yeah.
Absolutely. Lots of people talk about his form having dropped off this season, but he hasn't played that much. He's had injuries here and there. The situation at Chelsea is being chaotic. It's impossible to gauge the form of any player from the season that Chelsea has had, because they quite clearly are not the Chelsea of old. And I think under a different manager, we'll see some very different performances from a variety of players at Stamford Bridge, as we probably will do under Pochettino next season. But what we know about him as an individual is that he's extremely hard-working, he's extremely consistent, he can score goals, he is versatile, and you can see all sorts of reasons why Manchester United would want to sign a player like Mason Mount, but also all sorts of reasons why, for my money, this would be a massive dropping of the ball for Chelsea to allow him to leave. He's talismanic for the club. He's emblematic for what the club tried to do. For many, many years, we talked about the fact that John Terry had been the only homegrown player at the club, and they'd been working incredibly hard to bring through more players, and they have done that since. You're going to then have somebody like a Mason Mount and sell him to one of your rivals who are competing for the same thing in the Premier League. To me, that's mystifying. And now that the power is with him, with his contract expiring, Chelsea are helpless, really, to prevent him from going elsewhere. And as David's been saying, the only thing that they can do is recoup as much money as they can for him.